Hi, my name is Anna. I am a transgender woman living in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. I want to talk to you today about why the United States is not just hostile, but becoming dangerous to trans persons. My original impetus for making this video is that I am planning on becoming an expat soon, and I wanted to share and explain with my loved ones why it is that getting out of this country as a trans person is no longer just about discomfort, but about escaping an escalating campaign of persecution against people like me before the window closes. In the course of trying to explain myself, I really broadened my vista of the larger problem, and I would like to take some time to try to share it with you. I would really like you watching this to understand fully the gravity of the moment we are in. I do not want to be an alarmist or fear-mongering, but I see what I see. I especially do not want to sow fear in my trans siblings, as we're already bombarded with fear-mongering messages from both sides of the aisle in a constant stream, and the future it's still unwritten. There's always hope. But I still think it's important to assess the facts as a whole, even if it's a lot to take in at once, so that we can make informed decisions about resilience. This video is going to be long, and I apologize for that. But we've had enough of sound biting, which is more confusing than helpful, and what we really need is the big picture. Ultimately, this video is here so that folks can educate themselves, take action, form solidarity, and prepare for both resilience and admittedly possibly escape routes. After many years of coordinated, sweeping anti-trans legislation being pushed in every state by dedicated lobbyist groups, and now greatly accelerated by the Trump administration, the basic aspects of life as a trans person are being shut down in more and more states, and now the entire country. The situation is constantly accelerating. Just look at this map, compared to the one from just the year prior. Last year, Texas was still classified as a potential high-risk zone within a window of 2 years, and today it is one of the 2 states that is a no-travel danger zone. Here, let's slow it down and look at the transition between the two. In this video, I am going to set the stage for what the last 5 years have really been for my community, first on the state level, then on the federal level with the recent executive orders and everything else that's going on, then take stock of where we are now, and then finally where we are likely headed. Over the past few years, a wave of anti-trans legislation has been sweeping through this country, coordinated, intentional, and growing more aggressive by the day. This process has been going on for a while now. It is a methodical, strategic effort by a number of policy and lobbyist groups, such as the Family Research Council, a group that to this day supports conversion therapy and has direct ties to NARTH, which is the organization under whose umbrella I went through such therapy. I also want to draw attention to the Family Policy Alliance, the lobbying affiliate of Focus on the Family, which also supports conversion therapy, and Family Watch International, which has had a big influence in Africa and was part of the enactment of the infamous and draconian Ugandan Anti-Homosexuality Act. These fundamentalist Christian lobbyist groups have been at the forefront since the 90s of lobbying against all queer and trans rights, not just here, but even in their missionary territories in the global south. These organizations have been part of my own story for quite some time. Many years ago, as a way to process my own trauma with conversion therapy, I set to work on writing a script for a documentary about conversion therapy and the lobbyist groups who continue to support and push it, trying to get it reinstated. There is a nightmarish fever dream quality for me that the groups, which were so prominent in my own strange little Christian microculture backstory, now have the entire country in their grip. A quick note on the American College of Pediatricians. This one confuses people because their logo and their name sound kind of official, but This is not the same as the National American Academy of Pediatricians. It's false advertising. They are a small advocacy group that splintered off from the Academy in 2002 in order to advocate for abstinence-only sex education, conversion therapy, banning adoption for gay people, and other such measures. Another prominent lobbyist group in this scene is the Heritage Foundation, famously the authors of Project 2025. And by the way, Trump has always distanced himself strategically from Project 2025, but already only 5 months into his presidency, 40% of the project's proposals have been enacted already, and another 21% are in progress of being enacted. The comprehensive anti-trans agenda of these far-right lobbyists is being pushed by the White House administration itself, there is no doubt. Only certain bills have caught the headlines, but what most people don't know is that these bills, which are uniform and sweeping in nature, have been introduced into the legislature of every state in the country. Even my state of Oregon, which is a relatively safe place for trans folks, where anti-trans bills have no popular support, has 14 anti-trans bills proposed this year, and a cumulative 13 bills the 2 years prior. These bills are not being brought forward by the people, or in good faith, but by well-funded interest groups, and it would be good for us to understand that. Back in 2022, 33 states brought 174 anti-trans bills to the floor of their legislatures. That year set a national record for the most anti-trans legislation in 1 year for the 3rd year in a row. 2021 and 2020 had also set records. 26 anti-trans bills were signed into law across 33 states. In 2023, 615 bills were brought forward in 49 states, and 87 of them passed. In 2024, it was 701 bills in 44 states, with 51 passing. Of all these bills, the national media only really covers those specific topics that both the Democrats and Republicans have signal boosted as culture war or divisive topics, like transgender athletes, bathroom bills, and the medical transition of trans youth. And we're going to touch on these topics briefly right now, although we've got bigger fish to fry past those particular topics. And I don't have time to get deep into the sports bans, but briefly, these are the legislation that are the most controversial. Even some liberals and moderates support them. I would like to give you, though, 4 quick facts that are worth chewing on to give you a better context, a better political context. Fact number 1. There is not widespread and extensive participation in girls' sports by trans girls in K through 12, despite what you may hear. The West Virginia sports ban targeted a single 12-year-old trans girl who hadn't gone through puberty yet. In Pennsylvania, at the time of the ban, the Interscholastic Athletic Association only knew of 1 trans student athlete in the entire state. South Dakota, 1 student trans athlete. In Connecticut, 2 black trans athletes in track were targeted by a lawsuit, but after they graduated, there were no trans athletes in that sport in the state. In collegiate athletics, the NCAA identified only 10 athletes out of 510,000 that identify as transgender. According to my calculations, that is about 0.002%. Fact number 2. According to a study in 2023, after 2 to 4 years of hormone therapy, slightly different ranges for different activities, 2 years for running, 4 years for sit-ups, no physical advantage was found in trans women over cis women. Now, on the other hand, another study found that while trans women were at a disadvantage to cis men, they still had some muscle strength advantage after 3 years of HRT. The research on this is ongoing, but what is clear is that bans require trans women who underwent HRT to compete with men, where they have the same disadvantage as cis women, and for trans men who underwent HRT to compete against women, where, again, they have an advantage similar to cis men. realistically, trans women don't end up playing in men's teams. Trans men don't end up playing in women's teams. They're simply banned from participating in school or professional sports altogether. Fact number 3. Most of these sports bans are written broadly enough to even exclude trans folks from non-contact sports like darts and golf. In the State of the Union address, and since, Trump has repeated the claim that
last year, a male cyclist posing as a woman competed in the 800-mile Arizona trail race, a very big deal in cycling, and obliterated the women's course record by nearly 5.5 hours. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it, huh? 5.5 hours.
The so-called man cyclist posing as a woman was trans woman Austin Kellips, who competed in the Arizona Trail Race, which is a mix of cycling and carrying one's bike over terrain. Kellips did set a record with a 5-mile lead, but that's 5 miles out of 800. This is a race that takes many days to complete. On top of that, nowhere is it mentioned, somehow, that the event was co-ed, and that with a co-ed leaderboard. It was because of the co-ed nature in particular that Kellips was drawn to the race, because in her mind, quote, transgender people lost the inclusion battle in sports ages ago. But here was an event that she thought she was unlikely to be discriminated at. The previous record holder of that race had been a man, who had in turn won the title from a woman, and both of them, along with Kellips, lost the record to a Lithuanian only a few months later. Now, while of all the trans issues under review, sports is the most genuinely controversial and with the most nuance and ongoing research, I hope you can see how it is also being massively, artificially, magnified, twisted, and distorted as part of a broader campaign. As far as trans youth go, many of the bills in the first stage were aimed at minors undergoing gender transition, as the topic has been highly propagandized. To this day, the propaganda screams that transgender children are being surgically mutilated, language which has made it into the very title of Trump's executive order. But I cannot emphasize enough, this drummed-up fear is completely made up. The International WPATH standards for transgender care, which are recognized and observed in the US until recently and internationally, recommend that surgical intervention not be permitted until a trans person reaches legal adulthood. And trans minors getting surgery is virtually unheard of. The only case I know of is Jazz Jennings, who had her very high-profile surgery 4 months before her 18th birthday. Even as far as hormone therapy is concerned, a study this year found that of the trans youth on private insurance receiving gender-affirming care, less than 0.1% were prescribed either hormones or puberty blockers. And by the way, neither of these things are ever prescribed to a prepubescent child, despite what the propaganda is saying. Many of the healthcare bans serve not only to prevent trans youth from receiving gender-affirming care at all, including therapy in some instances, but criminalize parents, teachers, or healthcare providers for choosing to support their trans kids, students, or patients. What all this propaganda eclipses is the countless other anti-trans legislations that have been Trojan horsed in behind the trans youth bans. Bathroom bans can essentially desincentivize trans people from engaging in public life. Forcing a trans woman to use the men's bathroom or to be incarcerated in a male prison is essentially sentencing her to physical and sexual assault. The bans extend into talking or educating around trans issues to the point of erasing our history. To jump ahead a bit to the federal level, this February, the U.S. government, through the National Park Service, went so far as to quietly remove the T and Q from LGBTQ on the Stonewall Memorial website and educational material, literally erasing our pivotal role in the Stonewall uprising and scrubbing us from our own history. Some of the so-called drag bans have been deliberately worded to make any trans woman definable as being in drag, because They're defined specifically as publicly dressing in clothes opposite of your assigned sex at birth. And indeed, the first casualties of these laws have sometimes been trans people. Two-Spirit Adria Jawort, who is in no way a performer, even though these legislations supposedly are to target performers, had her library event canceled based on the law. And performance artist Amanda Lepore had her bar performance raided by police to check for compliance. Laws prohibiting drag were historically one of the main institutional means of discriminating against gay and trans people in the 20th century. During the Holocaust, transgender persons were sent to the concentration camps under the excuse of enforcing laws against cross-dressing. While these newer drag bans have been, luckily, consistently struck down by the courts, the intention behind them is clear to my community: to introduce language into a law that allows enforcing essentialist sex norms around dress, setting us back to pre-Stonewall persecutory laws.
Doom and groom.
Ending the mutilation of young children, the chemical castration of young children.
If kids in Florida can consent to chemical castration with no parental involvement, what exactly can't they consent to?
We're going to cut his body parts off. We're going to put chemicals in him. God, Satan loves us. And they get off on it.
No one's attacking transgender kids, young people. Most of them have been led to where they are by adult predators.
These bills are accompanied by toxic, nationwide propaganda implying or stating that trans people are groomers, pedophiles, and sexual deviants, and suspect of perpetrating sexual violence, despite our demographic being subject to more violence ourselves. This propaganda shows up inside the legislation itself, with a 2023 Arizona bill that banned books referencing talking about gender fluidity or pronouns next to grooming children for pedophilia. Legislation in 7 states also essentially require a child with trans identity to be outed to their parents. This can be extremely dangerous. Now, there is a chance that my parents are watching this video, and if that's the case, then sorry in advance, but my life story is what it is. If a school had outed me to my parents when I was a minor, I would have endured conversion therapy at an even earlier age. And I can tell you with near certainty that I would not be here alive and well today. Widespread bills are also working to prevent trans people from having proper documentation. In Kansas, they not only rolled back previous legislation that allowed trans folks to change their gender marker on their documentation, but they are now even actively reversing changes made by trans people to their birth certificates, reissuing them new certificates with the original gender marker, which sets a frightening precedent for those of us who have already succeeded in changing our documentation. Honestly, I think liberals have done my community a big disservice by framing trans rights entirely as affirming us in our chosen identity. The fact of the matter is that most trans rights are really about us being safe enough to exist and to have equal dignity. Whether you agree with me or not, for religious or political reasons, doesn't matter. That's beside the point. I still have a right to coexist with you in the same society. But it is our very existence that is at stake right now. Bills that determine there to be no such thing as gender identity, and there to be only male and female sexes determined by pronouncement at birth, are not just about enshrining a particular ideology into law. They're really about effectively erasing the legal existence and standing of transgender and intersex persons. In some states, the situation is now pushing beyond transgender people not being allowed to change their legal documentation. A 2024 memo to the Florida DMV stated that changing one's gender on a Florida license amounts to fraud and warns of criminal penalties for misrepresenting one's sex on an ID in language clearly intended to scare trans applicants. This signals the new line of attack. Florida is seen as extreme because it's the cutting edge of basically making it illegal to be trans. but it is the forerunner state where draconian measures are being tested out ahead of time. The new tack, which is one of the most frightening recent developments, seems to be to test the idea that it is fraud and criminal activity to possess an ID different than your birth sex. This year, Texas brought forward the gender identity fraud proposal, which would cause an individual to be charged if they, and I quote, knowingly make a false or misleading statement to a government entity or the person's employer by identifying the person's biological sex as the opposite. Now, the bill didn't pass, thankfully, but we will likely see more of these conceptual bills come forward that are essentially testing the water for making it full-on illegal to possess corrected documentation as a trans person.
As an aside, what does it matter if I, as a trans woman, have an M or an F on my ID? Well, as a more or less passing trans woman, though that's a subjective term and I still get clocked, I'm able to get through my life in relative safety. And indeed, that's what all trans people want, is to be able to just get through life safely. And the fact that my ID matches my appearance, my life, my person, my everything, it allows me to live in relative safety. And having an M on my ID automatically outs me as transgender, which wouldn't be as much of a problem if, there weren't state-sanctioned discrimination of trans people right now. Having had an M on my ID for many years after transitioning, I can tell you that the difference is palpable, even here in Oregon, and that was before persecution of trans people became mainstream.
We in the trans community have been saying since day one that the controversy around healthcare for trans youth was just the first step, really the first excuse in banning care for all trans people, and that is exactly what we are seeing happen. 10 states right now explicitly ban Medicaid or state insurance from providing gender-affirming care at any age. For the record, some hormone therapy is prohibitively expensive without insurance, and therefore HRT becomes essentially unavailable to adults who can't afford private health insurance. In 2023, Florida passed legislation to put numerous roadblocks up for trans adults to receive their health care, so much that many are forced to seek care out of state or underground. That same year, Kansas, Oklahoma, and South Carolina passed bans on trans healthcare that stretch into adulthood. An all-out ban has been proposed in Texas, which would be effected by simply striking the word "for minors" from a ban on youth trans healthcare. And back when I wrote the script for this video, which was only 2 weeks ago, mind you, that's how fast things are moving, I was going to say that I expect within the next year or two, we would see that same strategy used to remove gender-affirming healthcare for adults as well throughout the country. I could never have predicted how fast it would happen. On the 21st of May, in the dead of night, lawmakers from the House of Representatives snuck a simple last-minute amendment into Trump's big, beautiful bill, striking out the word "for minors," turning the bill into a ban for gender-affirming care for those on Medicaid, children and adults. 152,000 transgender individuals are on Medicaid, and this move essentially makes care unavailable for them. Trans folks are disproportionately lower income and rely on public insurance. For context, the place that I've seen trans people the most highly represented outside of trans-specific events and support groups is on public transit commuting to service jobs. What we're seeing with healthcare is the general trend we're seeing across the country with most trans issues, beginning in the extreme test case states. For example, bathroom bans initially only targeted K-12 schools, but are being extended to public colleges and then state and then federal buildings. What began under the rallying and rhetorical banner of "Save the Children," that's always the rallying cry for every cause, isn't it, is turning into a constant encroachment moving toward a more general and total ban. So much for the state legislature. I know it's a slog, but with Trump's new term, the process has escalated nationwide. To date, Trump has signed 5 executive orders against my community.
With the stroke of my pen on day one, we're going to stop the transgender lunacy. No matter how many surgeries you have or chemicals you inject, if you're born with male DNA in every cell of your body, you can never become a woman. You're not going to be a woman. I will ask Congress to pass a bill establishing that the only genders recognized by the United States government are male and female, and they are assigned at birth.
Number 1. Executive Order 14168. 1. Sex is assigned at birth and gender does not exist. 2. Cease all funding for gender-affirming care. 3. Remove all government resources for trans people. 4. Cease allowing gender marker changes on passports or visas. 5. Trans people must use the restroom facility of their assigned sex at birth in all federal facilities. 6. The Attorney General is urged to no longer provide civil protections against discrimination, meaning a trans person can be discriminated against or fired simply for being trans in federal jobs. 7. Transgender people should be imprisoned according to their assigned sex at birth, even if they have undergone bottom surgery, which strips trans protections under the Prison Rape Elimination Act.
The president will be signing an executive order keeping men out of women's sports.
From now on, schools will kick the men off the girls' team, or they will lose all federal funding.
Number 2. Executive Order 14201. Bans transgender women from playing in women's sports. The order will be enforced by removing federal funding from any institution that allows transgender girls to play on a girls' team.
The left-wing gender insanity being pushed on our children is an act of child abuse. Very simple. Here's my plan to stop the chemical, physical, and emotional mutilation of our youth. On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. I will sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age.
Number 3. Executive Order 14190. Prevents anything considered gender ideology, including talking about trans people or trans identity, from being discussed in the K-12, considering such things to be anti-American and subversive. How's that for some McCarthy-era language? Any teacher or school administrator who helps a transgender youth socially transition will be criminally prosecuted. Now, the definition of assisting transition and unlawful facilitation is very broad and includes counseling by a school counselor, referring to the student by preferred name or pronouns, referring to a student as non-binary, or allowing a student to use the bathroom that aligns with their gender or to join a sports team. Any violation of this law may be prosecuted. Schools found in violation will have their federal funding revoked.
My Department of Education will inform states and school districts that if any teacher or school official suggests to a child that they could be trapped in the wrong body, they will be faced with severe consequences, including potential civil rights violations for sex discrimination and the elimination of federal funding.
Number 4. Executive Order 14183. Bans transgender persons from the military. It states that having a gender identity different than one's birth sex, quote, conflicts with a soldier's commitment to an honorable, truthful, and disciplined lifestyle, even in one's personal life. In other words, according to the federal government, trans people are inherently dishonorable, untruthful, and undisciplined.
Expressing a false gender identity divergent from an individual's sex cannot satisfy the rigorous standards necessary for military service.
Trump asked the Supreme Court to override a halt put on this order by a lower court, and only very recently, on the May 6th, they cleared the way for him to enact it.
Service members who have a current diagnosis or history of or exhibit symptoms consistent with gender dysphoria may elect to separate voluntarily. There's a timeline here, and then eventually involuntarily if necessary.
Number 5, Executive Order 14187 blocks any transgender person under 19 years of age from receiving any gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers, which are a safe intervention specifically designed to delay a minor's transition long enough to give them time for discernment. Institutions that don't comply will have all federal funding withheld.
I will declare that any hospital or healthcare provider that participates in the chemical or physical mutilation of minor youth will no longer meet federal health and safety standards for Medicaid and Medicare and will be terminated from the program immediately. Furthermore, I will support the creation of a private right of action for victims to sue doctors who have unforgivably performed these procedures on minor children.
While the order did not ban gender-affirming counseling or therapy explicitly, the Department of Health and Human Services, in direct response to the order, released a 409-page report which promotes what they call gender exploratory therapy as an alternative to gender transition. And by the way, no authors signed their names to this report, and it's not peer-reviewed because, no one's going to put their name on this thing. It goes against, the entire, international scientific and medical consensus for trans people. The report makes a point of saying that what they call exploratory therapy has been previously mischaracterized as conversion therapy. But myself and others who have been through conversion therapy see this as a clear dog whistle for it. For context, the language used in this report is very, very similar to the sort used by NARTH, that's that conversion therapy organization I mentioned earlier, that my own conversion therapist was a member of, when they rebranded themselves as the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity. Ever since conversion therapy has become extremely unpopular and regarded widely as unethical, groups advocating for it have shifted their language in ways that are very similar to what we see in this document. As I read it, the HHS is advocating for trans youth to be psychotherapized out of being trans as the primary and potentially only form of clinical intervention, especially since they consider even socially transitioning, like wearing the clothes you prefer, having the name that you want, to be medical interventions. In addition to these measures, in February, the Department of Homeland Security quietly updated their policy manual so that gender identity and sexual orientation were removed from a list of protected characteristics that receive privacy protections under their intelligence activities. Basically, what that means is that, according to their new policy, a person can theoretically be surveilled just for being trans or queer with no other justification needed. And in April, the Department of Health and Human Services under Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced that gender dysphoria would no longer be recognized as a protected disability, opening up the pathway for even more outright trans discrimination. In general, the removal of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and language is being used as an excuse to remove all protections and references to trans people, because reference to our very existence is being framed as woke.
A concept that was never heard of in all of human history. Nobody's ever heard of this, what's happening today. It was all when the radical left invented it just a few years ago.
The National Science Foundation reportedly circulated internal guidance that listed, among others, keywords like transgender and non-binary as reasons to entirely disqualify a grant proposal. These here are supposedly the words banned under Trump's executive order, as reported by PEN America, based on whistleblowers and reports from news outlets. Although the National Science Foundation deflects in their frequently asked questions to worry more about substance than keywords, and has released no official list. So, personally, I still regard this list to be unconfirmed. While the laws are still being rolled out against trans people, the actual on-the-ground treatment by civil servants, police officers, TSA, is worsening. The mainstream media underreports on this, definitely, but I've had my ear to the ground for actual anecdotes and lived experience of trans people because I really care about that and take it very seriously. So here is where we are actually at in practice, not just in law or theory or statistics. I'm going to frame this section, I swear not self-servingly, as where I, as a trans woman looking to leave the country, am at, keeping in mind that I am on the safer side of things compared to most trans people. But I'm just using myself as a test case scenario because it allows me to touch on a lot of particular discrimination and safety issues all in one go. In the state of America today, there are 15 states where it is problematic for me to even travel through on a layover without complications, and several where it is all out risky. In various states, it is possible my hormones would be confiscated at TSA under the pretense of being suspicious pharmaceuticals. In several of these states, I cannot use the public restroom safely at the airport. And for years, trans people have been flagged at the TSA and put through invasive body searches. This is nothing new to the trans experience. It's practically a fixture of traveling as a trans person. But trans people have also reportedly been detained. There have been cases of trans folks having their ID flagged under the pretense of suspicion that it's a fake ID, or refuse to be allowed to board a plane because their state ID has an X on it, as in the case of trans OG Miss Major.
Well, I went to the airport today. I got there and found out I couldn't get on the plane because I used my ID, which has an X on it, to get on the plane. And I wanted to get this out to y'all to let you know that his way of expressing gender precluded me from getting on the plane.
None of these actions are legislated, but they are emboldened by the current systemic assault on our rights and are part of a systemic state-sanctioned oppression. As for the bathroom bills, some police are actively and enthusiastically enforcing the laws, and Utah set up a hotline for citizens to call if they see a violation of the law. Basically, if citizens see anyone that doesn't match their idea of correct gender presentation or appearance. There's been a number of credible accounts of male police officers and security guards, as well as private citizens, men, entering into women's restrooms and harassing both trans and cis women. Basically anyone they deem as not having a typical gender presentation or appearance, even in states without bathroom bans.
Ansley and her girlfriend Liz Victor were in a restroom at the Liberty Hotel in Boston when they say a male security guard came in and started banging on the stalls.
One of the security guards was there telling me to get out of the bathroom, that I was a man in the women's bathroom. I said, I'm a woman. It's just humiliating overall. Like I said, I didn't have my shorts tied even. And then just in front of everyone, someone said, get him out of here, referring to me. So he's a creep, also referring to me.
They came in here in the girls' restroom because I'm a girl and they didn't think I was a girl. So they try to come take me away because I'm a girl.
I want to pee in front with my room. It's a boy. Are you a man or a woman?
Why does that matter?
Well, because you're in the ladies' room. So what are you identifying as today?
I don't think that's any of your business.
Okay, it's not. So you're in the ladies' room where I think I need to identify you. Not allowed. Mm-hmm. Not allowed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you think you're going to be a woman? It's okay. And be a man? It's okay. No. Figure out your identity in your bedroom, okay? And then project it on everybody else and we'll accept it. This is not acceptable.
Let's go get security.
This is unbelievable. She said, you are not supposed to be here. You need to leave. So I said, yes, I do. And then she flipped me off, and she's like, "You're disgusting," and she storms out. So I realized, like, when I was washing my hands, like, holy she just thought I was somebody who was transgender.
I was fired from Walmart after a man followed me into the women's restroom and started yelling trans slurs at me.
Meanwhile, the FBI reports a steady rise in hate crimes against trans people. This administration and the State Department are encouraging and emboldening police, TSA officers, and employees of the State Department itself to harass or discriminate against trans people. One trans woman from Chicago submitted a passport application just to correct for her legal name change, and had the State Department holding indefinitely onto her passport and vital records, not even returning a corrected document with the gender marker changed to her birth sex. The State Department said they couldn't return either a corrected passport or the original because she had legally changed her name, so they can't give her an ID under her old name, but they refused to issue her a federal ID with her new feminine name, which has nothing to do with the law. That's just institutionalized systemic discrimination. She couldn't get her ID back until her state senators mediated for her. In Los Angeles, and mind you, this is in California, not in Kansas, trans woman Mary Folx tried to apply for a passport that recognized her legal name.
They are effectively banning me from travel, though they will not call it a travel ban. They stated that they would at first give me a passport that had the male identifier on it, though I have my sex legally changed to female. And 2 states and administratively with the federal government through Social Security before as well. And after claiming that they would give me the male one, I said, any is fine as long as I'm able to travel. They came back and said that actually, and we won't be able to give you that either. We won't be able to give you any passport. We have no further information.
Officials initially offered her a passport with a male gender marker on it, then rescinded the offer entirely, telling her that they couldn't give her a passport with either marker on it, and withheld her personal documents. When she continued to stick around the building to seek for clarification, she was forced to leave under threat of arrest. After considerable media attention and community support, Folx did eventually retrieve her documents and received a passport with a male gender marker. A resident in Massachusetts, Ash Orr, had their passport and vital documents, including birth certificate and marriage license, essentially held captive and didn't get them back until the ACLU sued the State Department. One trans person from Boston got their passport back with a big gash cut through it, like someone had stuck a razor through it or cut it with scissors, and had their vital records come back torn and burned. Yeah, literally burned with fire. I've also heard other reports, mostly by trans people on social media, talking about their friend or acquaintances' experience or ones they've heard of. And some of those might be duplicates of the anecdotes I listed above, or others may be new ones that I have just not been able to verify yet. As I leave this country, I have to be careful how I make my escape, essentially needing to make sure that my flight goes out of Chicago, New York, or maybe Denver, and that it does not get rerouted to a dangerous state. I mean, just consider, this is America we're talking about. Furthermore, if I leave the country and things escalate, and I am forced, for whatever reason, to renounce my American citizenship, which could happen depending on how things go, I might not be able to ever get back in. Marco Rubio, who's the head of the State Department, released a memo in February. That memo was titled as Guidance for How the Visa Adjudicators Are to Give Visas with Respect to the Executive Order of Keeping Trans Women Out of Women's Sports. So, it was ostensibly there to deny transgender athletes from entering the country. However, the text of the memo says that visa applicants must disclose their assigned sex at birth, must be issued visas as their birth sex, regardless of their legal documentation in their country of origin, and any application of a visa should be denied that visa, and therefore denied entry into the U.S., if the consular officer has reasonable suspicion that the person's gender identity does not match their birth sex, and can be asked to provide birth certificates to verify that they aren't, quote, lying about their sex. So, let's be clear about what this means. The ideological framework is now codified in policy that a mismatch between a person's stated gender identity and their sex assigned at birth may constitute a material misrepresentation on visa or immigration documents. As I mentioned before in the chapter on state measures, this seems to be the new tactic, reinterpreting trans people with their preferred gender on their ID, so female for trans women, male for trans men, as having false or dishonest and therefore void IDs. The potential applications of this are terrifying. The concern, worst case scenario, is that this encroaching attack on federal IDs for trans people, both officially under the law and unofficially by transphobic employees of the state, could potentially develop into making trans people essentially undocumented individuals like illegal immigrants. Now, it's a bold concern, admittedly, and a little doom and gloom, but given what we are seeing, you'll forgive me for considering this to be an actual, non-negligible possibility. What's clear is that they are willing to read the law very broadly, to use bureaucratic excuses, to make life, documentation, and travel a nightmare for trans folks, and the goal clearly is to remove us from public life entirely one way or another. To make matters more complicated, TSA has recently started rolling out facial recognition at the airports and is sometimes checking the social media and electronics of international visitors to the U.S. A French scientist was denied entry into Houston when the Customs and Border Protection officers checked his phone and found he had sent messages criticizing Trump's cuts to science funding. So even if I'm not clocked by TSA and they don't make me pull my pants down, they could ID me as trans unless my social media is thoroughly expunged. This isn't the situation that things get bad enough that I'm forced to renounce my citizenship. There's widespread pushback against Trump's executive orders in the lower courts, and for now some of the measures are temporarily blocked from taking full effect. But ultimately, the ability of trans people to live our lives in peace and safety may significantly come down to a Supreme Court decision, since these cases will inevitably be appealed up to them. It's a heavily conservative Supreme Court, 2/3 Republican, and the very recent decision of United States v. Schilling just decided to uphold Trump's ban on trans people in the military, while the legal challenges unfold in the lower courts. This suggests that the court may be likely to uphold Trump's executive orders. The only way this would not happen is if Justices Neil Gorsuch and John Roberts both break ranks with their fellow Republicans, which actually is theoretically possible, and it is something to hope for, but still, honestly, I do not like the odds. The process of appeal to the Supreme Court would normally buy my community some time, but Trump just recently accelerated the process. This entire rollout of anti-trans measures, state and federal, has occurred and continues to occur at a breakneck, exhausting pace, kind of like the breakneck, exhausting pace of this video. Don't worry, I'm aware of what this video might be like for some of you watching, but this is what we're dealing with. Onslaught after onslaught. In March, Trump made an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court to basically ask that executive orders can no longer be blocked by universal injunctions in the lower courts. SCOTUS heard oral arguments on this matter on May 15th, within the context of the constitutionality of removing birthright citizenship. So, if the majority of the Supreme Court justices end up siding with the president, and the lower courts can no longer block his executive orders, then Trump could potentially declare whatever he wants with diminished checks and balances, especially if the Supreme Court is going to back any executive order he puts out. A decision on the matter is expected in early summer. This is a place where there is some hope, and this is one of these classic areas where we can see that we are still in the relatively early stages of the Trump regime unfolding, there are still places of real, genuine resistance. It is worth hoping that this will not happen, that the Supreme Court will not side with him. So far, there is serious skepticism toward the administration's arguments among the justices, and even Amy Coney Barrett, who's famously very right-wing, spoke out with some skepticism. This article that I'm showing you here is worth checking out in full, by the way, for those who are interested in the maintenance of this country's checks and balances. It's a really interesting article. So if the Supreme Court does side with the administration, or if a case comes up to them that leads to a lawsuit for the erasure of gender and the strict definition of assigned biological sex, which is what just happened in the Supreme Court of England, if either one of those happens, I believe it will allow for the swift escalation of what we're already seeing to the next level. Everything has already happened so much faster than anyone expected, and I think this trend is likely to continue. This is the strategy of the Trump administration. It's blitzkrieg. It's shock. Shock and awe, pushing things so fast, so nauseatingly fast, that there's not time or wherewithal for real resistance. I repeat, though, it is worth hoping that SCOTUS will act with integrity, if for nothing else, then for the preservation of their own authority and power as separate from the White House. Adding to this mixture, oh my gosh, is I need a breather myself, is the fact that in 2024, the Democratic Party mainstream essentially abandoned trans people. Once Kamala lost, the mainstream media commentators instantly blamed wokeness, including trans issues, as losing her the election, despite her running a very center-right campaign that distanced itself from all these issues. In the state and local primaries, Democratic politicians dropped us like hot potatoes. This probably shouldn't surprise us too much because despite the Democratic Party's best efforts to rebrand, we do need to remember that gay marriage was opposed by most leading members of the party, including Obama and Biden, and that what shifted the tide on that issue was our family, our friends, our neighbors, and the general public having a change of heart. Only then did the politicians get on board in order to secure our votes. So, in my view, the Democratic mainstream never really were in our corner fully, but now the mask is off, and we're left with less political leverage, which is unfortunate. Of course, that does not negate the awesome progressive legislators standing in our camp, including the fact that there is currently a trans senator, Sarah McBride, who is killing it. I love that woman. But honestly, while the conservative swerve of the center Democrats is obviously not comforting, it's manageable, and there is definitely still place for hope here because it has always been the case that real lasting change comes from the bottom up, never from the top down. So the change we want to see of us being accepted and safe in this society is going to come from the grassroots regardless. I don't want to overextend myself in making predictions about what late 2025 and beyond will look like for trans people across this nation. But I hope you have enough information now to connect the dots for yourself, and I will do a little recap in a second. Significant language is now inserted into both law and policy to facilitate possible broader persecution of trans people. Adding fuel to the fire is the fact that Fox News and the Daily Wire cover trans issues incessantly and obsessively. At one point, over a quarter of Fox's news side programs were about trans people, and at the beginning of the year, they aired more segments about trans issues than MSNBC and CNN combined. Meanwhile, trans people are only about 1% of the population, and in all this obsession over us, actual trans voices are largely not even invited to the table. This is classic scapegoating. Scapegoating mechanisms kick in specifically toward minority groups that are too small or invisible to defend themselves in order to offload larger societal problems onto them.
At the end of the day, trans people are less than 1% of the population, and trans people are not the reason you can't afford eggs. We're not the reason that you can't afford health care. We're not the reason that you can't buy a house or your rent's too high. Yeah. I think they're focused on the wrong 1%. Ooh. I think the other 1% is the reason for all those things.
So this is where we're at after only 4 months of Trump's second term. We have 3 years and 8 months to go. Now that's 3 years and 8 months to resist, to organize, to support and love each other. And we also need to understand the possible trajectories.
The problem with transgenderism is not that it's inappropriate for children under the age of 9. The problem with transgenderism is that it isn't true. That there is no meeting halfway between truth and falsehood, between reality and delusion. There's no neutrality. There can be no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. It is all or nothing. If transgenderism is false, as it is, if men really can't become women, as they cannot, then it's false for everybody too. And if it's false, then we should not indulge it. If it is false, then for the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology at every level.
Here's a summary of the risk, and hold on for a bumpy ride. Already enacted, trans people effectively can't play sports on the scholastic or professional level, not being able to perform on the team of their gender or their assigned sex at birth. Ongoing threat? Though the battle for trans inclusion in sports was really lost years ago, right-wing media continues to focus on it incessantly, using the issue to drum up anti-trans sentiment. Enacted. Teachers and physicians can be charged with felonies for so much as calling a trans kid by their preferred name or pronouns, since even that can be construed as aiding in the social transition of a youth. In some states, parents of trans kids are also criminalized for allowing their child to transition. Possible threat. Social transitioning is now considered a form of medical transitioning, and all forms of medical transition, including puberty blockers, are framed as mutilation. This opens the pathway for parents who allow trans children to call themselves by their preferred name or pronouns, or to dress in clothes appropriate to their gender identity, to fall under the broader umbrella of grooming and enabling child mutilation. Enacted in scholastic, state, and federal environments, trans people effectively can't use the restroom, not being able to use the correct gender toilet, but also being unsafe going to the bathroom of their assigned sex at birth. Ongoing threat. Police, security guards, and citizens have been empowered throughout the country to harass any gender nonconforming person they see in the bathrooms. Possible threat. The rollout of bans to public restrooms as well, though the mechanism of how they would do this is unclear to me, other than emboldening citizens to litigate against trans people for using public restrooms. Enacted. Gender-affirming health care coverage is already removed from Medicaid for youth and adults, and many states have banned state insurance for such care, some bans also stretching into adulthood. Likely threat. Now that the striking out of the for minors clause has been proven to work on the federal level to transform trans youth bans into full-on youth and adult bans, conservative states will probably follow suit. Future threat. The federal government could push against the haven states by prosecuting. The quickest way they would do this is by persecuting doctors for providing gender-affirming health care, which would keep doctors from providing care simply out of fear of being litigated against for malpractice. Enacted. On the federal level, trans people can be discriminated against, surveilled, and denied visas just for being trans. Future threat. This paves the way for whatever they want to do to my community next. In progress. Any mention of transgender persons is being purged from the federal government, research, classrooms, and even queer history. Officially, our historic existence, that is before conservatives decided to notice us, is being denied. Ongoing threat. If we are not recognized as a historically marginalized group, but are seen as a woke mind virus and an unreal invention and fiction, this paves the way for our social and legal as well as historical erasure. In progress, public opinion is being massively swayed against the transgender community by a nonstop barrage of propaganda linking us to grooming and mutilating children, pedophilia, and the notion that trans women are trying to infiltrate women's spaces to physically or sexually injure cis women, and that we're part of a conspiracy to degrade biological reality and embodiment and erode the foundation of society. The immediate threat? An increase in violence and discrimination. And an ongoing issue here, the voices of actual trans people are largely absent from the national discussion, and the political temperature forces us to keep our heads down. This renders us invisible, allowing them to project whatever the heck they want on us. Enacted. Trans people cannot get federal documentation with the correct gender marker. Sporadic threat. Trans people have been refused federal documentation with their assigned sex at birth also, leaving them essentially undocumented. And a possible threat. Possessing an ID with a gender marker other than that of your assigned sex at birth is being increasingly framed as fraud, which could give grounds for going after trans people with corrected state IDs even in haven states. Another possible threat, Kansas has now paved the way for retroactively rolling back corrected documentation for trans folks who have already made the changes. Possible threat, transgender persons could be denied IDs even with their assigned sex at birth if their appearance doesn't match gender norms. Consider this case in 2015, where Louisiana DMV refused to give a trans woman a driver's license with an M on it because her appearance, obviously, did not fit masculine gender norms.
If you have makeup on or anything like that, you're supposed to take all that off because you are actually a man.
Since 1986, state motor vehicle policy has stated that at no time will an applicant be photographed when it is obvious he or she is misrepresenting his or her gender.
The individual clearly was appearing to be female and was making himself up to be female in spite of the fact that his driver's license was to a male.
Possible severe threat? The ID push could progress toward trans persons being undocumented individuals, which would place us in the same camp as illegal immigrants and allow for more severe persecution such as detention. I know it looks grim, and believe me, I do not want to be the messenger of this report. But even if short-term, this evaluation I've given is triggering, I think ultimately I would do a disservice to my community and its allies if I shy away from the possible repercussions here. I cannot predict which of the possible threats will come to pass, although it is concerning that in the space between writing the script for this video and actually recording it, one of them already came true. What I will say is that I really think that every trans person in America should have a contingency plan. The first step is to have a haven within the U.S. you can move to, or to form together resilient community support and mutual aid for financial assistance, for being able to provide each other with hormones. Beyond that, and believe me, I cannot believe I'm saying this, I really suggest that every trans person who can have an escape plan lined up to flee the country if need be, whether that's just a haven country to hide in temporarily or a full-on immigration plan. For most, that will likely be Canada or Mexico, but other options exist, though they might require further planning, and it's good to get ahead of it. A lot of comparison so far, and some of it, we have to admit, a kind of boy who cried wolf scenario by the mainstream media who cries foul every time Trump sneezes, have been made between Trump and fascist leaders like Hitler and Mussolini, and there are definite, robust comparisons to be made, especially right now with the treatment of pink triangles, that is the LGBTQ plus Germans, during the Third Reich. There are some genuine parallels. However, we would do well to remember our own history here in the States. Every war, every turn back on civil rights, Americans act like it's happening for the first time because we have no knowledge of our own history. The seeds for what can happen here were started way before neo-Nazis started demonstrating in our streets. The 1924 Asian Exclusion Act prevented Asian Americans from coming into America, and many East Asians and Indians were forced to leave the country. During World War II, Japanese Americans were taken from their families and interned in concentration camps. In the early 1950s, Senator Joseph McCarthy and J. Edgar Hoover enacted an inquisitorial reign of terror against anyone suspected of being a Red. These realities are not as far from our national character. They are not as far away from us as we would like to think. My entire community feels the moment we are in. Laverne Cox, who might be the most visible trans woman in America, was urging the community back in January to not catastrophize.
I am not a victim, and I refuse to be a victim in this circumstance. None of this should be surprising to us. This is what the conservative movement has wanted to do in this country for decades. We must not catastrophize. We must remember we've been here before. As trans people, our identities have been criminalized, and we found ways to have community, to have joy, and to be ourselves. They told us they were going to do this. They're doing it, and accept that. And now what?
These words are still worth taking to heart. We are a resilient community, historically resilient. But it is not without reason that several trans influencers I follow are looking at fleeing the country or have already done so.
I'm getting ready to leave the country for my sanctity, for the sake of making sure that I'm safe. I'm leaving. As I'm sitting here in the airport, actively in the airport, I watch a video of a trans woman who basically went to go get her passport renewed. And they say, oh, we can't give you a passport at all. Now, I want you all to understand that this is fascism 101. Because what we need to understand is that the way that fascism works is that it always starts with the people that nobody cares about. They start to implement things like this on the people that all of the majority of folks are going to overlook, because then what happens is it makes it easier to do it to everybody else later. And so people are actively seeing what is going on to trans folks and to immigrants and things of that nature, and they're kind of saying like, oh, that's fucked up, but it ain't me, so, and moving on. But what I want you to understand is that it's not you right now. It's not you today. It's not you in this particular moment. But the way that fascism works, and the way that the system works, and the way that the handbook works, is that it will eventually be you.
Like I said at the beginning of this video, I have no intention of fear-mongering. There are many points where this destructive train could be derailed, and there are important places of resistance. And if nothing else, we have hope in our mutual aid, in our own courage and historic resilience. In the Christian West in particular, and in their colonies, we have endured hundreds and thousands of years of being silenced, and yet we are still here, and we will remain here. And I could be wrong about where I feel this train is taking us. And I hope I am. If someone ever gets to say, I told you so over this video, I'm going to give them a hug and a kiss and maybe a bottle of champagne. And in my own personal center, you could say I am manifesting our collective joyful resistance and thriving, our safety and our voice being heard. I am keeping my eye trained on the horizon toward the dawn. If you watch this video and you are trans or queer yourself, or have a trans loved one, and you feel deeply affected by it, be kind to yourself and take time to process. But the purpose of this video is not to cause paralysis, but so people can act, first and foremost for their own safety, and then for mutual support. Only time will tell how all of this plays out. But by the time it does, it could be too late to take the necessary precautions. The lesson of all the authoritarian regimes in the 20th century is consistently to get out early and to not wait for things to get better. That's why I am jumping the gun and putting this video out there, for better or for worse. While I think legislative activism is obviously called for at this time, and civil resistance, I also think our most effective resistance will inevitably be loving each other deeply and taking care of one another while living brilliantly. That is not a fluffy statement or a denial of the need to stand our ground, but so much of the situation we are in right now, we need to realize, is a direct result of the polarization and the politicization of our identities and existence. We absolutely need to transcend that binary political overlay which cashes us in as cultural tokens one way or another, and focus primarily on staking out our right to exist, while existing beautifully and courageously. In the face of widespread propaganda that frames us as dangerous deviants, our opposing argument is our own dignity, our beauty, and our strength. Above all else, whether you agree with my existence or not, I am. I would like to reframe our struggle, not as a David versus Goliath battle with the federal government, which puts us at a great disadvantage, although we also need warriors who stand their ground, but rather as a nonpartisan, human, and universal struggle to have our existence and dignity fully recognized. We are human beings, and we are beautiful. We have always been here, and we will always be here. No matter what climate we live in, we have and we always will love, dance, and celebrate our existence.
And then now what for me are all my girlfriends. We hang out and we have community and we support each other and we lift each other up. And that's what queer and trans people have been doing since we've existed.
Bless all of you watching this, and take deep and loving care of yourself and your transgender siblings. Anna, signing off.